You are not weak. Let me repeat that, you are not weak. The trembling you feel in your chest, the hesitation before you speak, the paralysis before making a decision, none of that is weakness. It is fear. Fear not of failure, not of rejection, but of something far more unsettling, the magnitude of your own power. Carl Jung understood this paradox better than almost anyone. He saw that what terrifies us most is not the darkness outside, but the unclaimed light within. Because if you dared to live with all of your strength, your intelligence, your creativity, nothing in your life would remain the same. And change, real change, is terrifying. So let me ask you, what if your so-called limitations are lies you've told yourself, just to avoid confronting what you are truly capable of? What if the life you secretly dream about isn't impossible? It's simply waiting for you to stop hiding. And here's the promise. By the time you reach the end of this video, you will see yourself differently. You'll understand why you've been sabotaging your own potential, and more importantly, how to step into a life that feels like it was always yours to claim. If this resonates with you, if something in you whispers that these words are true, then stay with me. And while you're here, make sure you subscribe. Not as a casual click, but as a kind of inner commitment, a signal to yourself that you are done living small. This channel is not entertainment. It is a challenge. And if you're ready to face yourself, you belong here. The paradox of power. Here is the great paradox. People often describe themselves as weak, insecure, or powerless. Yet every human being is born with instincts, drives, and capacities capable of reshaping reality itself. The energy you call you is not fragile. It is primal, ancient, and dangerous. Why then do so many of us walk through life hunched, timid, afraid to speak up, afraid to act, afraid to take our place in the world? Jung would say, because we fear what might happen if we actually became who we are. Consider this, weakness is comfortable. If you call yourself weak, no one will demand much of you. You are excused from responsibility. But if you embrace your strength, if you admit that you are capable of more, then every excuse disappears. Now you must rise, and that is a heavy burden. Have you noticed this in your own life? The moments you shrink away are not when you are incapable, but when you sense the door opening to something larger, a promotion, a relationship, an opportunity, and you retreat. Not because you couldn't step through, but because you knew once you did, you could never go back. This is the paradox of power. We long for it, but we fear it. We pray for freedom, but when the cage door opens, we stay inside. Nietzsche, Jung's great contemporary, saw this clearly when he wrote about the will to power. Not just power over others, but power as the expression of life itself, the drive to grow, to expand, to create. To deny this drive is to deny life. Yet how many of us live like shadows of ourselves, haunted by the very force that could liberate us? Why is it that when life hands us the opportunity to rise, we so often step back instead? Why is it easier to dream than to do, easier to fantasize than to act? Carl Jung gives us one of the most haunting answers, because to accept our power, we must accept our shadow. The shadow within. Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves we repress, the instincts, desires, and potentials we push away because they feel too dangerous, too wild, or too shameful. Society tells us to be polite, modest, and restrained. But beneath the mask of civility, there is rage, ambition, lust, brilliance, creativity, and hunger. When you deny your shadow, you don't erase it. You simply push it into the unconscious, where it grows even stronger. And here lies the problem. Power lives in the shadow. Your capacity to lead, to create, to speak boldly, to love passionately, all of it is tied to instincts you were taught to hide. If you want your power, you must make peace with your shadow. But that is terrifying, isn't it? Because what if, in embracing your shadow, you unleash chaos? What if the fire burns you alive? This is why so many people choose weakness. It feels safer to remain small than to risk becoming dangerous. A story of avoidance. Think of the student who knows they could dominate the exam if they studied, but they procrastinate, self-sabotage, and tell themselves they just aren't good at school. Why? Because if they tried and succeeded, they would have to live with the burden of expectation. Teachers would demand more. Parents would expect more. Life itself would demand more. Or the person who avoids love. They claim they're unlucky in relationships, but deep down they know the truth. Intimacy terrifies them. Because love requires vulnerability, honesty, the courage to face rejection. It requires stepping into their power as a partner, not hiding as a victim. Weakness is a disguise. It is easier to wear than the nakedness of your true self. The neuroscience of fear. Modern psychology and neuroscience back this up. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, reacts not only to threats of danger, but also to threats of change. Any major shift in identity, any leap into new possibility, is interpreted as a risk. Your nervous system floods you with anxiety not because you are incapable, but because it senses transformation. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, described how humans are loss-averse. We fear losing what we know more than we desire gaining what we don't. Even if what we know is misery, we cling to it because it feels safe. That's why you might feel a strange panic right when things are about to go right. Your body doesn't distinguish between the fear of death and the fear of growth. Both feel overwhelming. So you retreat, not because you lack power, but because you are afraid of it. Socrates and the fear of knowledge. Socrates, long before Jung, recognized this same truth. Know thyself, he declared, was the highest command. But he also knew that true self-knowledge was the most terrifying task of all. To know yourself means to strip away illusions. To admit not just your flaws, but your strength. And strength is harder to bear than weakness. Because once you see it, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. You are responsible for it. Ask yourself, are you hiding from your weakness, or are you hiding from your strength? Pause here. Reflect. Have you noticed moments when life gave you the chance to step up, and you felt fear, not of failing, but of what would happen if you succeeded? Have you ever dimmed your light so others wouldn't feel threatened? Have you ever told yourself a story of limitation, just so you wouldn't have to carry the responsibility of possibility? If yes, you're not alone. This is the human condition. But recognizing it is the first step to transcending it. Because once you see that your weakness is only fear in disguise, you can begin to walk toward it instead of away. But the story doesn't end there. Understanding fear is one thing. Confronting it is another. If power is hidden in the shadow, how do we face it without being consumed? How do we embrace the strength we've been running from our entire lives? This leads us into Jung's most radical idea, that wholeness, not perfection, is the path to real power. Carl Jung's most important idea was this: the goal of life is not perfection but wholeness. Most people misunderstand this. They think self-development means polishing away every flaw, becoming flawless, spotless, pure. But perfection is sterile. It's lifeless. Perfection demands the erasure of your shadow, and in doing so, erases half of who you are. Wholeness, on the other hand, means embracing every part of yourself, the noble and the shameful, the brilliant and the broken, the saint and the sinner. True power comes not from denial, but from integration. Why wholeness matters? Imagine a king who rules only half his kingdom. The other half he ignores, leaving it to rebels and thieves. His throne might appear strong, but his kingdom is always on the verge of collapse. This is what happens when you reject your shadow. You live in half-light, always vulnerable, always incomplete. But when you integrate, when you turn toward your shadow and make peace with it, you expand. You gain access to energy, creativity, and resilience you never thought possible. This is individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. A story of transformation. Let's ground this in a story. There was a man, brilliant in his career, admired by his peers, but inwardly tormented. He had buried his anger for decades, because as a child he was told anger was dangerous. So he became the nice guy. Polite, agreeable, but underneath, resentment grew. He became passive-aggressive, bitter, and exhausted from keeping the mask in place. In therapy, he confronted his shadow. He allowed himself to feel the anger he had denied. He realized that anger was not only destructive, it was protective. It told him when boundaries were crossed, when his dignity was threatened. Once he integrated it, he didn't become violent. He became clear, assertive, alive. His colleagues noticed the shift. He no longer said yes to everything. He spoke with authority. For the first time in years, he wasn't drained. He was powerful, not because he erased his anger, but because he reclaimed it. That is individuation. The shadow is energy. Here's the truth. Your shadow is not an enemy. It is raw energy waiting for form. Your jealousy contains the energy of ambition. Your fear contains the energy of caution and wisdom. Your anger contains the energy of protection and justice. Even your laziness contains the energy of rest and reflection. When you deny these, they rot in the dark. When you accept them, they transform. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, put it beautifully. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The very parts of yourself you thought were flaws may hold the key to your greatest strength. The trap of perfection. But society seduces us with perfection. Instagram filters, self-help cliches, productivity gurus, all whisper the same lie, that you must erase your flaws to be worthy. This is why so many people burn out on self-improvement. They treat themselves like machines to be optimized. They chase perfection and wonder why they feel more broken than before. Perfection fragments you. Wholeness integrates you. Jung saw that those who chase perfection become hollow. But those who embrace wholeness radiate authenticity. They are imperfect, yes, but they are real. And nothing is more magnetic than someone who is fully themselves. Have you noticed? Think of the people you admire most. Are they perfect? Or are they whole? The artist whose work moves you, don't they pour their flaws, their struggles, their shadow into their art? The leader you respect, don't they have scars, mistakes, contradictions? The friend you trust most, aren't they the one who shows you their vulnerability, not the one who pretends to be flawless? You don't resonate with perfection. You resonate with wholeness. And the same is true for others with you. The cost of denial. What happens if you ignore this? If you keep denying your shadow, it will control you from the dark. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Think about that. Every time you say, that's just the way I am, are you sure it's you? Or is it your shadow pulling the strings? The person who explodes in rage, they're often repressing anger until it bursts. The one who sabotages every relationship, often hiding a fear of intimacy. The one who avoids risk, often driven by unacknowledged ambition they dare not claim. When you repress, the shadow leaks out sideways. In addictions, in breakdowns, in toxic patterns. Wholeness is not optional. It is the only path that leads out of the maze. So let me ask you, what part of yourself have you been running from? What qualities in others irritate you the most? And could it be because they mirror something you've disowned in yourself? Take a breath here. Let the question land. Because the moment you stop denying your shadow is the moment you begin to step into your power. But here's the challenge. Integration is not comfortable. It's not a neat checklist. It is a confrontation, a wrestling match with the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. How do we do this without being swallowed by it? How do we embrace our shadow without losing ourselves to chaos? For that, we must explore the ancient archetypes, Jung's way of mapping the psyche, guiding us toward balance. Carl Jung believed that within every human being live ancient patterns, forces older than culture itself. He called them archetypes, universal images, stories, and energies that shape how we think, feel, and act. The hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the mother, the shadow. These archetypes appear in myths, religions, movies, and dreams. They are not just symbols. They are the architecture of your psyche. And here's the key. Your power is tied to these archetypes. The parts of you you've repressed often belong to one of them. By recognizing and integrating these forces, you gain access to a strength you didn't know you had. Let's begin with the hero. Every story of transformation, from Hercules to Harry Potter, is about the hero leaving the comfort of the known world, confronting monsters, and returning transformed. Why do we love these stories? Because they mirror your own psychology. Every time you face fear, every time you step outside your comfort zone, you are living a hero's journey. But here's the catch. The hero only discovers his strength by confronting the shadow. In every myth, the monster is not just an enemy. It is the embodiment of the hero's own inner fear. So when you shrink from challenges, when you avoid risk, you are refusing the call of the hero. You are choosing weakness, not because you are weak, but because you are afraid of the dragon inside. And yet, as Joseph Campbell said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Have you felt this in your own life? That the thing you avoid most, the conversation, the decision, the risk, is exactly the thing that could unlock your next level? That is the hero archetype calling you. Now let's turn to the shadow. In myths, the shadow is the villain, the monster, the dark twin. But Jung reminds us, the shadow is not merely to be destroyed. It is to be integrated. Consider the myth of the Greek hero Theseus. He enters the labyrinth to slay the Minotaur. But the Minotaur, half man, half beast, is not a random monster. He is the embodiment of human instinct, the part of ourselves we fear. Theseus defeats the Minotaur not to erase him, but to prove mastery over the beast. Likewise, you do not overcome your shadow by killing it. You overcome it by facing it, wrestling with it, and learning from it. This is why your greatest fear often hides your greatest gift. The shadow carries the power you've denied. Jung also described the archetype of the wise old man, the mentor, the sage, the inner voice of truth. In myths, it's Merlin to King Arthur, Gandalf to Frodo, Yoda to Luke. But here's the insight. The wise old man is not just an external figure. He lives within you. He is the part of you that already knows the path. The intuition you ignore. The whisper of clarity you drown out with noise. When you deny your power, you silence this guide. When you listen, you often realize the wisdom was there all along. Pause for a moment. Have you ever noticed how, in your darkest hours, there's a quiet voice that tells you what to do? Not the panic chatter, but the calm knowing? That is the wise old man archetype speaking. Another archetype Jung highlighted was the trickster. The trickster is chaos. He breaks rules, shatters illusions, exposes hypocrisy. In myths, he appears as Loki in Norse mythology, Hermes in Greek stories, even the Joker in modern culture. But the trickster is not just destructive, he is creative. By breaking false rules, he reveals hidden possibilities. You fear your trickster side because it feels reckless. But without it, you remain trapped in rigidity. Sometimes your power emerges only when you dare to disrupt, to play, to risk being foolish. How many times have you been trapped by the belief, I must do it this way, only to realize later there was a completely different path? That's the trickster's gift. The beauty of archetypes is that they reveal what you've forgotten. If you feel powerless, the hero is dormant in you. If you feel lost, the wise old man is whispering inside. If you feel rigid, the trickster is knocking at the door. If you feel weak, it is because your shadow holds the strength you refuse to claim. Jung's insight was that you don't invent yourself from nothing. You awaken the archetypes that are already alive within you. Why we resist? But here's the problem. Each archetype comes with responsibility. To live as the hero means risking failure. To listen to the wise old man means admitting you already know what you must do. To embrace the trickster means letting go of control. To integrate the shadow means admitting you are more powerful and more dangerous than you thought. And responsibility terrifies us. That's why we call ourselves weak. It's easier to say, I can't, than to admit I won't. Easier to stay asleep than to awaken the archetypes within. Let me ask you directly, which archetype do you feel stirring in your life right now? Do you feel the hero calling you to a challenge you keep postponing? Do you hear the wise old man whispering a truth you don't want to admit? Do you sense the trickster trying to break the rigid rules you've trapped yourself in? Or is it the shadow holding the power you fear to claim? Sit with that, because your answer may reveal the next step of your journey. But understanding archetypes is only the beginning. They show us the map. The real question is, how do we move from fear into action? How do we stop running from ourselves and finally step into the life waiting for us? To answer that, we must look at the psychology of courage, and how even the smallest acts of bravery can unleash the power you've been hiding. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting while fear is still in the room. This sounds simple, but it is the turning point between a life lived in hiding and a life lived in power. Because here is the truth, you will never get rid of fear. You don't wait for fear to vanish. You move despite it, and in doing so, you discover it was never the master, only the test. Most people believe that stepping into their power requires some grand, heroic act, quitting their job in a blaze of glory, making a speech that changes everything, confronting every demon in one night. But courage rarely works this way. Courage is cumulative. It builds with repetition. It begins with small acts of defiance against your own timidity. The moment you speak up in a meeting instead of staying silent. The moment you say no to something that drains you. The moment you admit the truth to yourself, even if you don't act on it yet. Each small act is a signal to your unconscious. I am no longer ruled by fear. And over time, these signals accumulate until fear is no longer the loudest voice in the room. Jung put it this way, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Notice he didn't say once and for all. It's a daily act, a gradual unfolding. Responsibility equals freedom. Here's a paradox. The moment you take responsibility, you feel lighter. It doesn't make sense at first. Responsibility sounds like weight. It sounds like burden. And yes, in one sense it is. But avoiding responsibility, blaming, hiding, shrinking, is far heavier. Because every time you deny responsibility, you carry guilt, regret, and self-contempt. Responsibility, on the other hand, is clarifying. It's like picking up the sword you've been afraid to touch. Yes, it's heavy, but now you are armed. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. The why is responsibility. When you know what you're standing for, you can endure the fear, the pain, the uncertainty. So ask yourself, what responsibility have you been avoiding? What sword are you pretending doesn't belong to you? Because the moment you claim it, you will feel something you haven't felt in years: freedom. Modern psychology confirms what Jung and Nietzsche intuited. Behavioral science shows that the fastest way to reduce anxiety is exposure, gradually facing what you fear, step by step. Every time you avoid, fear grows. Every time you approach, fear shrinks. Neuroscience backs this up. Your brain's fear center, the amygdala, quiets down when you repeatedly expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of. Courage rewires your brain. This is why courage is less about confidence and more about habit. Confidence is the result of action, not the prerequisite. Have you noticed this in your own life? The first time you tried something, it felt terrifying. The 10th time, it felt natural. The difference wasn't that fear disappeared. It's that your brain learned you could survive. Think of Rosa Parks. She didn't topple a system with an army. She made one decision: to keep her seat. That small act of courage set off a wave of transformation. Think of the student who raises their hand in class for the first time. That single moment may change their identity from silent observer to participant. Think of yourself. When was the last time you took a small courageous step and felt the ripple effect in your life? This is the secret. You don't need to be fearless. You only need to act once. And then again. And again. The enemy of power. Comfort. Here's the real trap. It's not fear alone that keeps you weak. It's comfort. Fear shouts loudly, but comfort whispers sweetly. Comfort says, stay where you are. Don't rock the boat. Tomorrow is safer. But comfort is a cage disguised as a couch. The longer you sit in it, the weaker you feel. Ask yourself, is your life designed around avoiding discomfort? Around staying safe? If so, that is why you feel powerless. Because power is never found in comfort. It is forged in discomfort. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, reminded himself daily, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He knew that comfort dulls the soul, but struggle sharpens it. Pause for a moment. Picture the version of yourself you secretly know you could be. Stronger, braver, more creative, more authentic. Now ask, what small act of courage would that version of me take today? Not tomorrow, not next year. Today. It might be a conversation, a decision, a risk. Whatever comes to mind, that is your next step toward power. And here's the invitation: share it. Leave it in the comments. Because when you name your act of courage, you make it real. And when you share it, you remind someone else that they are not alone. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, not to me but to yourself. Subscribing here is your reminder that you are committed to acting in courage, not in comfort. But courage, while essential, is not the end of the story. Acting bravely is one thing. Sustaining power is another. Many people glimpse their strength for a moment, but then collapse back into fear. So the deeper question is, how do you hold your power once you've tasted it? How do you live consistently as the person you are becoming? For that, we must explore the union of discipline and meaning, the two forces that stabilize power so it doesn't slip away. The paradox of fear and power. Why is it that the closer you move toward your true potential, the louder fear becomes? This is one of the great paradoxes of life. Fear doesn't grow weaker as you grow stronger. It adapts. It evolves. It finds new disguises. For some, it comes as perfectionism. I'm not ready yet. I need more preparation. For others, it shows up as procrastination. I'll start tomorrow when the conditions are better. And for many, it appears as self-sabotage, the quiet, almost unconscious act of tripping yourself just before the finish line. Jung would say this is not weakness, it's the psyche defending itself against transformation. Because transformation is painful. Think of the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. On the outside, it looks miraculous. But inside the cocoon, it is chaos. The old body literally dissolves into liquid before a new form is born. That's what it feels like when you begin to embrace your own power. The old version of you, your old identity, your old comfort zones must dissolve. and the mind, terrified of death, resists. But here's the truth. The fear you feel in front of your own greatness is not a sign you should stop. It's a sign you're in the right place. Nietzsche called it the path of fire, that every great transformation passes through discomfort, through uncertainty, through resistance. Not because you are weak, but because you are stepping into an entirely new dimension of being. Ask yourself, when was the last time you stood on the edge of something great, only to feel the weight of fear pull you back? Did you call it bad timing? Did you convince yourself it wasn't for you? Or did you recognize it for what it was, the trembling of the cocoon before it breaks? Because here's the deeper question. If fear always intensifies at the edge of your potential, then maybe fear isn't your enemy at all. Maybe it's your compass. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries within them a shadow, the hidden, repressed, and often uncomfortable aspects of the psyche. When people hear the word shadow, they imagine something purely negative like anger, jealousy, or rage. But Jung was clear. The shadow is not only darkness. It also contains the untapped, unclaimed parts of ourselves, our instincts, our creativity, and yes, our power. The tragedy is that most people never dare to open that door. Why? Because it's terrifying to confront what we've hidden. Imagine a basement you've avoided for years. You don't know what's down there. You only know it's dark, messy, maybe dangerous. So you shut the door, and you tell yourself you're safer upstairs. But here's the secret. The treasure you're searching for is down there too. Your shadow holds the energy of everything you've disowned. Maybe as a child, you were told you were too loud, so you pushed your natural confidence underground. Maybe you were told to be realistic, so you buried your dreams. Maybe you were told anger was bad, so you repressed your ability to stand up for yourself. And now, as an adult, you feel powerless, not because you are weak, but because you've cut yourself off from your own inner resources. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Think about that. How many times have you said, "That's just how I am"? Or, "I guess life just turned out this way"? What if those weren't truths, but shadows in disguise? Consider this. The qualities we admire most in others are often the ones hiding in our shadow. When you look at someone bold and courageous and think, "I could never do that," what if that's actually your own buried courage waiting for recognition? But here's the danger. If you don't integrate your shadow, it doesn't disappear. It leaks out sideways. It shows up in envy, resentment, passive aggression. It shows up when you overreact to something small, because the real energy behind it has been bottled up for years. Jung warned that what you resist persists. The shadow doesn't go away just because you pretend it isn't there. It only grows stronger in the dark. This is why many people feel weak. They are not weak. They are fragmented. Half of their psyche is locked away. They are living on half power, half voice, half vision. And here is the paradox. The very thing you fear most about yourself may be the key to your strength. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who has always been the nice one. They avoid conflict. They don't want to upset anyone. On the surface, this seems admirable. But deep down, this person has also buried their capacity for anger, which is also their capacity for boundaries, for protection, for saying no. They feel weak, not because they lack strength, but because their shadow holds the part of them that knows how to fight. Or take someone who buries ambition. Maybe they were raised in an environment where dreaming big was considered arrogant. So they learned to shrink themselves. On the surface, they look humble. Inside, they feel restless and dissatisfied. Not because they have no dreams, but because their shadow holds the ambition they've never dared to embrace. This is why Jung's work is so radical. He didn't say, "Get rid of your shadow." He said, "Integrate it. Make it conscious. Bring it into the light." And that process is not comfortable, because it means admitting that your weakness may actually be self-inflicted. It means admitting that your fear is not of failure, but of the immensity of what you could become. So let me ask you directly, what part of yourself have you locked in the basement? What quality in others do you secretly admire, or even resent, because it's a mirror of your own disowned strength? Have you ever noticed how much energy it takes to hide from yourself? To keep a lid on your desires, your emotions, your truth? No wonder so many people feel tired, anxious, powerless. They are carrying the burden of their own unlived life. The question isn't, are you weak? The question is, what are you afraid would happen if you stopped being weak? But the story doesn't end there, because Jung also warned of a deeper danger. If you ignore your shadow for too long, it doesn't just sap your strength, it begins to control you. It becomes fate. And this leads us into the next layer. how the unclaimed parts of yourself show up in projection, in relationships, and in the destiny you unconsciously create. Jung observed something profound. When we refuse to face our own shadow, we don't make it vanish, we project it. The psyche can't stand a vacuum, so what we repress inside, we end up seeing outside. You've probably experienced this without realizing it. Think of the people who irritate you the most. Why do they get under your skin? Often it's not because of who they are, but because they reflect something you've denied in yourself. The person who seems too confident, maybe they're showing you the assertiveness you've hidden. The person who seems too ambitious, maybe they mirror the dreams you buried. The person who seems too emotional, maybe they carry the vulnerability you've suppressed. Projection is the mind's way of saying, I can't look at this in myself, so I'll see it in you. But projection doesn't only appear in irritation. It shows up in admiration too. When you idolize someone, when you think, they're so amazing, I could never be like that, you're often looking at your own unclaimed qualities. Jung put it simply, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Your heroes and your enemies are both mirrors. They're showing you your shadow. Let's make this real with a story. Take the young artist who worships a famous painter. They say, she's a genius. I could never create something like that. On the surface, this looks like humility. But beneath it, there's projection. The artist isn't just admiring, they're disowning. They are projecting their own creative fire onto someone else, rather than daring to claim it. Or consider the man who despises arrogant leaders. He rails against their boldness, their commanding presence. Yet secretly, he wishes he could stand in a room and own his space with that kind of authority. His hatred is projection. He resents in them what he cannot access in himself. This is why Jung insisted that confronting projection is one of the most important steps in self-discovery. Because until you reclaim what you've projected, you will always live in someone else's shadow, either worshiping them or despising them, but never becoming yourself. Now think about this in your own life. Who do you admire so much it almost hurts? Who makes you say, I could never, and who irritates you more than they should? What if both are carrying pieces of you that you've exiled? Because here's the paradox. The world you see is not neutral. It's a reflection. You don't just see reality. You see yourself, refracted through your projections. Jung's point was radical. Until you own what you've projected, you're not living freely. You're living under a spell of your own making. This is why people feel powerless. They give their power away to their heroes, saying, they're special. I'm ordinary. They give their power away to their enemies, saying, they're the problem. I'm helpless. But what if every figure you love and hate is a messenger, carrying back a part of your shadow, urging you to claim it? Modern psychology echoes this. Cognitive science tells us that we don't perceive reality directly. Our brains filter, interpret, and project constantly. Neuroscientists like Donald Hoffman argue that what we see is more like a user interface than raw truth. So when you're reacting strongly to someone, it's not just about them. It's about the interface of your own psyche. It's about the hidden file you've dragged onto their face. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate psychologist, reminds us that the mind is full of biases, shortcuts, and distortions that bend our perception. Projection is one of the most powerful of these biases because it makes us believe that what we fear, admire, or hate out there has nothing to do with in here. But Jung flips this. He says what you refuse to face in here will run your life out there. So pause and ask yourself, who are you secretly giving your power to? Who carries the qualities you're too afraid to own? And how different would your life look if you stopped projecting and started integrating? Because the truth is, projection keeps you weak. Integration makes you whole. And wholeness, not perfection, not sainthood, is the source of real strength. But this raises a deeper question. What happens when you actually begin to integrate? What does it mean to stop projecting, to face the shadow directly, and to reclaim the power you once disowned? This takes us to the next stage of the journey, the confrontation with fear, and the liberation that follows. Every myth, every great story, every spiritual tradition has some version of this truth. Before you claim the treasure, you must face the dragon. Jung saw this as more than a metaphor. The dragon is fear. It guards the gold of your potential. And here's the paradox. The bigger the treasure, the fiercer the dragon. Most people, when they meet this dragon, retreat. They take fear as a sign to turn back. But what if fear is not the barrier? What if it's the doorway? Think about it. Fear only rises where there is something meaningful at stake. You don't tremble in the face of mediocrity. You tremble in the face of greatness. You don't feel resistance when you're wasting your time. You feel resistance when you're on the edge of something real. So fear isn't your enemy. Fear is the proof that you're close. Jung wrote that where your fear is, there is your task. Fear marks the exact place where growth waits for you. It is the compass needle pointing to the shadow you've avoided. Let me illustrate with a story. There's an ancient myth from Mesopotamia about the goddess Inanna. She descends into the underworld, seeking wisdom and transformation. At each gate, she must surrender something, her crown, her jewels, her clothes, until she stands naked before the queen of the dead. It is terrifying, humiliating. And yet, only by passing through this fear, this stripping away, does she gain the power to rise again. That's how fear works in our lives. It strips us of false protections. It forces us to let go of the masks. It feels like death, but it's the prelude to rebirth. When you avoid fear, you avoid transformation. When you walk through fear, you walk into yourself. Modern science confirms this. Neuroscience shows that fear is a function of the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. Its purpose is survival. But here's the problem. The amygdala can't distinguish between physical danger and psychological growth. To your brain, standing on a stage and speaking your truth feels just as threatening as standing in front of a predator. This is why your hands sweat before the interview, why your heart races before the performance, why your stomach tightens before you confess your dream. The brain is screaming, danger. But the danger isn't death. It's expansion. If you interpret this signal as a warning to retreat, you stay small. But if you interpret it as a signal of importance, you step through the gate. Athletes know this. Performers know this. Every great creator has felt the fear before stepping into the arena. The fear doesn't vanish. They just learn to see it differently, not as a stop sign, but as a threshold. Now think about your own life. Where is fear holding the door shut? Is it the fear of speaking up? The fear of leaving behind what's comfortable? The fear of admitting what you truly want? Jung would say, that's exactly where your power is hiding. Because fear is not random. It's precise. It flares up exactly at the spot where the self you've been must give way to the self you're becoming. Ask yourself, what dream have you been circling around, always finding reasons to delay? What conversation have you been avoiding? What step do you know you need to take, but haven't? That's your dragon. That's your task. And here's the truth. The dragon is never as strong as it looks. The moment you confront it, you realize it's partly made of smoke. Because fear is anticipation, not reality. It feeds on avoidance. The longer you wait, the bigger it grows. The moment you face it, it shrinks. This is why so many spiritual traditions speak of initiation through trials. The trial is not meant to break you. It's meant to reveal you. Fear is the initiator, forcing you to decide, will you remain small or will you expand? Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, put it in simple terms. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Fear isn't blocking your path. Fear is the path. So let me ask you, what would change in your life if you stopped treating fear as an enemy and started treating it as a guide? What if every time fear showed up, you said, here's the threshold. Here's the door? What if instead of shrinking, you leaned in? What if you realized that fear was never proof of weakness, but proof of importance? Because here's the transformational truth. Your power doesn't lie on the other side of fear. Fear is the key that unlocks it. But even fear is only part of the story. Because once you confront the dragon, once you face the shadow, you discover something even more unsettling, the sheer magnitude of your own potential. And that realization can be more frightening than fear itself. This is where Jung's insights converge with Nietzsche, with Socrates, with every great thinker who wrestled with the weight of human freedom. Because the real terror is not that you are powerless. The real terror is that you are powerful beyond measure. The terror of greatness. We usually think weakness is what holds us back. But what if it isn't weakness at all? What if the real barrier is the terror of realizing how powerful you actually are? Carl Jung hinted at this when he said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Privilege, not guarantee. Because becoming who you truly are means carrying the unbearable weight of freedom. Think about it. If you really admitted your power, you would no longer have excuses. You could no longer hide behind circumstance or blame. You would have to face the truth that your life is, in many ways, in your hands. And that responsibility is staggering. This is why many people unconsciously choose smallness. Not because they can't do more, but because doing more would expose them to themselves. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this deeply. He spoke of the Übermensch, the higher self, the human who transcends the herd and creates new values. But Nietzsche also knew that this vision was terrifying, because to embrace it means letting go of external authority and taking radical ownership of one's own life. He wrote, "Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. The abyss is freedom. The abyss is responsibility. The abyss is realizing you are not weak. You are afraid of your own vastness." And so, instead of stepping into the abyss, many retreat. They choose the comfort of conformity, the safety of mediocrity, the relief of never testing their strength. Kierkegaard and the dizziness of freedom. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom. He observed that when a person realizes the sheer range of possibilities available to them, it doesn't feel liberating at first. It feels dizzying, overwhelming. Freedom, he said, brings anxiety, not because we are weak, but because we sense the enormity of what is possible. This is why people often avoid choice. To choose is to accept responsibility. To choose is to admit, this is my life and I am shaping it. That level of ownership feels like too much to bear. So instead, we hide. We tell ourselves, I can't. But more often, the truth is, I won't. Even Socrates, centuries earlier, pointed toward this fear. His declaration that the unexamined life is not worth living was not a condemnation, but a challenge. To examine one's life fully is to confront both one's failures and one's immense, untapped power. It is to admit that you are not merely a victim of fate, but a participant in destiny. And that realization can shake you to your core. So let's pause here and make it practical. Why is greatness more frightening than weakness? Because greatness demands responsibility. Once you know your power, excuses dissolve. Visibility. Power cannot stay hidden. The moment you embrace it, the world sees you and may judge you. Change. To live fully in your power, parts of your old life must die. Comfort zones, relationships, even identities may fall away. And perhaps most frightening of all, greatness means failure matters. When you're small, failure is safe. But when you step into your full self, the stakes feel higher. That's why so many never dare. So I'll ask you, are you hiding behind weakness when in truth, you're shielding yourself from the immensity of your own potential? What excuses feel safe, but are really disguises? Where have you settled for less, not because you had to, but because the alternative was too vast to face? And what would happen if you dared to accept your freedom fully? Because the truth is, the terror of greatness is not a curse. It's an invitation. If you feel that fear, it means you are standing at the edge of the abyss, the place where the rope stretches across. And the abyss is not there to swallow you. It is there to be crossed. But crossing it doesn't mean erasing fear. It doesn't mean becoming invulnerable. It means walking with fear, integrating the shadow, reclaiming the projections, and carrying the responsibility of your own potential. And when you do that, something extraordinary happens. You discover that you were never weak. You were only afraid of your own power. And this takes us into the closing transformation, where all of Jung's insights converge into one truth you can carry into your own life. So here we are. We've pulled apart the mask, we've stared into the shadow, we've faced the paradox of weakness and power, and we've named the terror that hides behind greatness. Now the question isn't what is fear. The question is, what will you do with it? Because here's the truth, fear never really disappears. You don't conquer it like some video game boss and then walk away victorious. No, fear evolves with you. Each time you grow, it shapeshifts. Each time you rise, it whispers again. That's why Carl Jung said, where your fear is, there is your task. The task is not to escape fear, but to face it head on. To see it not as a barrier, but as a mirror. A mirror that shows you exactly where you are still asleep, where you are still holding back, where you are still smaller than the life you were called to live. And maybe that's why you're still here, listening right now. Because deep down, you know you've been avoiding your own greatness. You've been playing small. You've been choosing comfort over calling. But if you've made it this far in the video, it's because some part of you is done with that. Some part of you is ready to stop running from the shadow and instead stand in front of it, eye to eye, and say, I see you, but you will not control me. That moment, that inner decision, is where life begins. That's when you stop being a victim of fear and start becoming a student of it. That's when every trembling moment becomes fuel for transformation. So here's the challenge I'll leave you with. Tonight, sit in silence for 5 minutes. No phone, no music, no distractions. Just you and your thoughts. Ask yourself, what am I most afraid of right now? Don't censor it. Don't justify it. Just write it down. And then ask, What would it look like to take one small step toward this fear instead of running from it? Do that, and you won't just change your week. You'll start to change your life. Because fear, in the end, isn't your enemy. It's the invitation. The invitation to wake up, to grow up, and to step into the person you were meant to be all along. And if you want to keep walking this road with me, if you want more than just theory, but a community that stares at these uncomfortable truths together, then hit that subscribe button right now. Not because it helps the channel, but because it's your way of saying, I'm ready. I'm not running anymore. And remember, where fear lives, your destiny hides.